But what we have found, at least in our scientific studies, is that prefrontal cortex region that we spoke about before, that sort of rational, logical part of the brain, that's one of the first things to go when you're sleep deprived. So that area of the brain just gets sort of switched off.
Right.
The more that you are sort of lacking in your sleep. And deep emotional centers of the brain, which are normally controlled and kept in check by that prefrontal cortex, they just erupt in terms of their activity. So you're all emotional gas pedal and too little regulatory control brake, which for the most part, very bad. But, one possibility is that if you want to try and get a little bit sort of, crazy, loosey-goosey, maybe that's not bad for that type of sort of comedic writing, that you become a bit more childlike. And I say that affectionately because the last part of the brain to mature in development is the prefrontal cortex. So you revert back to almost a more childlike state. But I honestly would not condone that sort of, undergoing sleep just based on the mortality and, risk of Alzheimer's and cancer by itself. You just don't want to undersleep. Even
in short doses, like a couple days a week, like if sleep is not a renewable resource, like what is the effect of, say, if you have 3 nights a week where you sleep 8 hours and then the next night 2 hours and then the next night 8 hours, how much of a bump or how much of a dip does that 2 hours give you in your overall health?
It's bad.
It's bad.
So I'll give you 2 examples. There was a study where they just took individuals and they just gave them 4 hours of sleep for one night. And what they saw was a 70% reduction in critical anti-cancer fighting immune cells called natural killer cells. These are wonderful immune assassins that target malignant cells. So today, both you and I have produced cancer cells in our body. What prevents those cancer cells from becoming the disease that we call cancer is in part these natural killer cells. And after one night of 4 hours of sleep, that is a remarkable state of immune deficiency. And that's one of the reasons why insufficient sleep predicts cancer.
Wow.
I could also speak about your cardiovascular system, though, and all it takes is 1 hour. Because there is a global experiment that's performed on 1.6 billion people across 70 countries twice a year, and it's called daylight savings time. Now, in the spring, when we lose an hour of sleep, we see a subsequent 24% increase in heart attacks.
What?
In the fall, in the autumn, when we gain an hour of sleep, there's a 21% decrease in heart attacks. So it's bidirectional.
Wow.
That's how fragile and vulnerable your body is to even just the smallest perturbation of sleep.
1 hour.
1 hour is
That's
all it takes.
insane.
Yeah.
Wow. You're blowing my fucking mind.
It's frightening. I mean, you can go even further, by the way.
Wow.
Insufficient sleep will even erode the very fabric of biological life itself, your DNA code. So in one study, they took a group of healthy adults and they limited them to 6 hours of sleep for 1 week. And they compared the profile of gene activity relative to when those same people were getting 8 hours of sleep. And there were 2 critical results. The first was that a sizable 711 genes were distorted in their activity caused by 1 week of 6 hours of sleep, which is highly relevant, by the way, because we know that many people are trying to survive on 6 hours of sleep during the week.
Wow.
The second,
No, please go.
I was going to say the second sort of perhaps more interesting result was that about half of those genes were actually increased in their activity. The other half were actually suppressed. Those genes that were switched off by 6 hours of sleep for 1 week were genes related to your immune response, many of them. So you become immune deficient. Those genes that were increased, or what we call overexpressed, were genes that were related to the promotion of tumors, genes that were related to long-term chronic inflammation within the body, and genes that were associated with stress and, as a consequence, cardiovascular disease.
This is unbelievable.